So good evening, everyone. I'm Paul Skinner, founder of MarketingKind, and welcome to this MarketingKind exchange, where we'll be asking, can all good marketing be marketing for good, with none other than Seth Godin. Now, as we do have so many guests with us this evening, by way of introduction to MarketingKind, we're a membership community of marketers and change makers who believe that as most of the world's problems depend for their resolution on forms of human cooperation, they're also marketing briefs in disguise. So we have an opportunity and even a responsibility to better use marketing to create positive change. We partly do this by stepping outside of our day jobs and upcycling our marketing skills in support of inspiring charities and social enterprises through our volunteering platform and also through our Coffee with a Cause gatherings. And we'll be hearing from the founder of the cause that we'll be supporting in this month's Coffee with a Cause partway through our conversation this evening. We also seek to take a more conscious approach to all of the change that we lead. And so we coach each other in becoming more purposeful and impactful marketers through our digital fireside and your MarketingKind gatherings. And we recognize that the systems of which we are a part are themselves shaped by the stories that we tell each other across society. So we come together through our monthly exchanges to explore some of the bigger stories that we live and work by and how we might change those stories for the better. For example, last month we explored how we can create a climate for change in sustainable development. And next month we'll be asking how we can make freedom everyone's business and all play a more vigilant role in the fight against modern day slavery. Now, I've learned a huge amount by working through MarketingKind, and especially with our causes. For example, while I used to believe that our causes simply changed people's lives, I've since come to the more nuanced understanding that usually they do something even more valuable than that, which is to create the conditions in which people can improve their own lives. I heard a particularly compelling account from an older woman who was a beneficiary of the charity Food Cycle. And she revealed that she only had one remaining living family member, her son, and he now lived in Australia. So she hadn't had the chance to see him for over 4 years. And during that time, she'd become increasingly isolated, lonely, vulnerable, until, in her own words, she'd gradually started to lose the will to properly take care of herself. So when Food Cycle reached out and offered her a good meal in good company once a week in her local community, clearly that wasn't going to be enough. But having Food Cycle one day a week also gave her something to look forward to on the other days of the week. It helped to restore her self-confidence. It reminded her of the value of eating healthily. It gave her access to a social circle of people that she could start to befriend and make arrangements with on the other days of the week as well. So bit by bit, it transformed her whole set of inner beliefs around what she could make life like again. Now, this evening's conversation is an opportunity for us to rewrite our stories in terms of what we think marketing is in the first place and what we believe we can use it to achieve. And I cannot think of anyone better to have that conversation with than Seth Godin. I remember the first time I Googled the search term greatest marketers of all time, and Seth's name duly popped up on a list between Plato and Steve Jobs. He's written 20 international bestsellers, and these books, from Tribes to Purple Cow to Small is the New Big, have really shaped our understanding of marketing for generations. Perhaps even more importantly for this conversation, I would describe Seth as one of the most positive marketers in the world. And his most recent books, This is Marketing and The Practice, redefine the core pursuit of marketing and restore generosity to the heart of the creative process. And I was in no way surprised to discover that the initiative that Seth founded to help people create the change they want to see in the world is itself now structured as an independent B Corp. Now, Seth's ideas have built billion-dollar businesses. They've raised similar sums for important nonprofits. And there is something about Seth and the sum of $1 billion, because I also discovered in preparing for this conversation that Seth once literally turned down $1 billion job offer. Now, once you've said no to $1 billion, I can imagine you feel you can say no to pretty much anything that you like. And yet Seth has chosen to say yes to the opportunity to spend this time with us, helping us become the more purposeful and impactful marketers that we would like to be. So thank you so much, Seth Godin. Welcome to MarketingKind. How are you feeling today?
Oh, I'm so lucky to be in a room with people like you guys. The hardest part of my job is persuading people to get the joke that you already get, to help people see that marketing is about making things better by making better things. And it's just a privilege to be here. So thank you for having me.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, it's so kind of you to join us, and introducing you, I have to admit, it does feel completely surreal. I mean, you have achieved things that it's difficult to even conceive of that level of success. I remember once a friend of mine said that he was like a massively less successful version of Seth Godin. And I wondered if I could become a massively less successful version of him and whether there was a career opportunity for that. And so this day is very special. But introducing you like this, I do wonder, is it being kind to you? Or actually, is the purpose of an introduction to be kind to the audience? Because in some way, I'm sort of covertly, by reminding you of your greatness, keeping you on the hook for this time that we have together. And I know that you happen to have looked into the backstory of this phrase, on the hook. So I wonder if that might be a nice entry point into the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, first, I'm not going to be self-deprecating or falsely humble. But I'm not great at all. I've just been showing up for a long time. I was born with great parents, won the birthday lottery, got the benefit of the doubt over and over again in a world filled with caste due to indoctrination. But I did the hard work of showing up in a specific way. And I got really fortunate in the fact that the internet matches my limited attention span, as well as the fact that marketing changed on my watch. That when I wrote Permission Marketing in 1999, people thought I was delusional. And that's a quote from a book about my work. And I just stuck with that. And it turned out that the world shifted. So marketing isn't about hype, and marketing isn't about hustle. And marketing is not about selfish, short-term narcissists seeking to maximize profit in a misguided Milton Friedman sort of way. There are people who do that work, but I refuse to call them marketers. And so my mission, if I have one, is to continue narrating and letting other people like you do this incredibly difficult work, the heavy lifting of persistently and consistently making things better. And I get way too much credit for that because it's everyone else who's doing the work. I'm just showing up.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the impulse for me when I first, sought to seek out this conversation actually came when I first picked up This Is Marketing. And on the very opening page, we get to the words, "It's time to do something else with marketing, to make things better, to cause a change you'd like to see in the world." Now, that's certainly a very popular sentiment at MarketingKind, but you've written books previously on individual aspects of marketing. So what led you to seek to redirect marketing as a whole in this way at this particular time?
So I used to be a book packager. I did 120 books in 10 years. My job was to think of books. That's how I got paid. And after Permission Marketing, I didn't have to write books for a living. And so I just decided that I would write a book as a last resort, that a book is a magical thing. It is a totem. It is shareable. It is an age-old technology that we can put on a shelf behind us in a color-coded way if Anna likes them in that order. And but it's also an enormous amount of work to bring a book to the world. And so the 20 books that I've written, I haven't written them because it was time to write a new book. I wrote them because the people in my life needed them and I needed one. I was writing for me and for them to somehow figure out how to put a stake in the ground step by step. So they do fit in an arc. They're not necessarily in the perfect order, but what I felt was happening now that we finally put the last nail in the TV coffin is marketers were floundering because they were trying to turn the internet into television, and it's not. And they were trying to find a mass market, and there isn't one. And they were acting out in ways that were amplified by social media companies, who I'm no fan of. And I just wanted to lay it all out there because I'm 60 years old. And if I wasn't going to do it now, I was never going to do it.
I mean, you kind of allude to some of those important steps, and there's a couple of them that I think it might be worth surfacing at this point in the conversation, because I've no doubt we'll refer back to them during our conversation. And the first one is actually spelled out on the very front cover of This Is Marketing, that you can't be seen until you learn to see. And I think one of the most valuable things that we can learn from a great marketer is, how can we understand people through Seth Godin eyes?
So everybody who turns you down, who doesn't buy what you make, who doesn't support your project, is correct. They are right to say no. Because based on who they are, what they know, what they believe, what they fear, what they dream of, where they're headed, the people around them, in that moment, based on all of that, they've made the right decision because they're not you. And it's really hard for someone who's worked hard to accept that, because we imagine that the noise in our head is the same as the noise in everybody else's head. And that's not the case. So years ago, I wrote a book called We Are All Weird. And what I described in that book is that industrial capitalism, which is different than regular capitalism, industrial capitalism pushed us to the center of the bell curve. It is much more convenient for people who want to be mass marketers if we are all similar. And so the book was a little controversial because I said the people who have been pushed into the middle aren't going to listen to you or buy from you anyway. That the only people who are available are the ones who have chosen to be on the fringes. And 2 days ago, Unilever, great British company, announced that on 230 of their skincare and healthcare products, they were removing the word normal. And I love this because nobody has normal skin. They have the skin they have. And I don't have any hair, but no one has normal hair. They have the hair they have. And no one cares about what normal hair is. They care about what works for them. And once we can embrace the people who aren't us, which is everyone, we get a chance to seek out the smallest viable audience. And we can talk about that in some detail, because particularly for cause marketers, the smallest viable audience is the only audience that matters to you.
Yeah, I did want to pick up on that, because in some ways it's counterintuitive. As a marketer, you might think, I want to reach as big a market as possible. I think, it's so interesting hearing you speak and reading your books, because one thing that you're so free from is you're free from the decontextualizing language of management speak that stops people being people and turns them into something less than a person so that we can think about them at scale. But, because it's such a counterintuitive idea, the idea of a minimum or smallest viable market, why would we want to reach the smallest viable market, and how do we make a success of that?
Okay, so let's take our time and break this out, because I think it's at the core of what we're doing. This looks like a party hat, but it's not. It's actually a funnel. And the funnel is, even if it's unstated, is what most mass marketers think about. I need to put the maximum amount of attention at the top. I need to be on television. I need to be on Oprah. I need to do all this stuff, because then if I'm lucky, out the bottom comes some sales. Because the funnel is leaky. Of course, not everyone I put in the top comes out the bottom. So I just put more stuff in the top. And that is the way most marketers think. Put more stuff in the top. And what the flaws in that argument are is, first of all, television was a screaming bargain. For 50 years, it was the cheapest, highest return thing almost any company could do. And now it doesn't work anymore. Number two, the internet is not a mass medium. First medium built in history without marketers responsible for it. We built TV so we could have a place for TV ads, but we didn't build the internet so we would have a place for internet ads. The internet is really bad at reaching everyone. There's no homepage. It's very good at reaching someone particular. And number three, the biggest one, is attention is precious. Everyone only gets 24 hours a day, and you can't get any more. So even though we now see 30, 50, 100 times as many ads as we used to, even though we now have a circle that violates Dunbar's number, and there's more people in our lives than ever before, when a marketer comes and tries to strip mine our attention, we resent it. They are burning trust. So what's the alternative? The alternative is to turn this on its side and make it into a megaphone. Not a megaphone for you, but a megaphone for your customers, for a select group of customers who care about you and your mission to tell the others. Because it's called the internet. 2 words in it that mean the same thing, inter and network. It's a network, it's connection. It's not you yelling at people, it's people telling the others. People like us do things like this. Now, what I say to the marketer who says, but I need more, I start by saying smallest doesn't mean small. Smallest simply means what group are you willing to put yourself on the hook for? How can you be specific? Being specific means that if that group doesn't get the joke, if that group doesn't talk about it, if that group doesn't care, you were wrong. You failed. You got to go get better. Marketers don't like that. Marketers prefer to say, this is for everyone. Everyone needs to read my book or buy my ketchup. And if you don't get it, well, there's someone right around the corner. And if we put ourselves on the hook, we're more likely to overwhelm the people we seek with something worth talking about. And it's that idea of doing something worth talking about that enables us to ratchet things forward in the evil sense, because trolls are worth talking about at some level, but in the positive sense, because if we can start making things better by making better things and giving our customers a reason to spread the word, they will do so.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I love about that process is by beginning with the individual people that we care about and want to create positive change for. I think that, we put marketing at the beginning of a process rather than the end of a process. And maybe one of the reasons why marketing can appear selfish is that it's left until too late. I remember one of my favorite comedians told the impromptu story of how he'd been discovered hanging off the end of a diving board in a swimming pool. And he said that he was trying to decide whether or not to dive and left the decision until too late in the process. And I think that marketers, when we're stuck on a question of how do we get the word out, we seem selfish because it's how do we get people to do the thing we want them to do. Whereas if we've actually begun with this process of change that you're talking about, then, we've identified our contribution in the first place.
Right.
I do want to get on to some of the ethical dilemmas. So, let me spot you that we've learned how to understand people with you, and we understand the people that we care about, but that doesn't necessarily put us on their side. So, for example, you can understand someone and feed an addiction. I could be a slot machine and give you a $2 payout in the hope that I'm going to extract $20 from you and leave you effectively impoverished by our experience together. So what can we embed in the process to make sure that the relationship we have with the people that we care about is an elevating one?
Yeah, this is, there's just so much pathos in this part of the conversation. In Mumbai, until 15 years ago, the entire city, a city as big as London or New York, had 11 ambulances. And so if you needed an ambulance, you were just going to die. And a company called 1298, funded by a nonprofit I work with called Acumen, has figured out a ratchetable, scalable system. So now there are hundreds and hundreds of ambulances in Mumbai, and you pay what you can afford. Also in Mumbai are millions and millions and millions of cars and many two-stroke engines that are killing people every day due to lung disease or running people over or whatever. So the question is, are cars good or bad? Well, on one hand, they make ambulances work. And on the other hand, they cause people to die because a careless driver. So what should we do about cars? Well, I would say the exact same rationale works for marketing. My friend Scott Harrison has raised $250 million for Charity Water, and that has ended up saving the lives of 20, 30, 40, 50 million people alive today because Scott is good at marketing. So I'm in favor of that. On the other hand, I was giving a talk 10 years ago and some yutz in the back raises his hand and says, well, that's great, but how can I use my platform as head of marketing for some cigarette brand to sell more cigarettes? Like, I'm not even going to bother responding to your question because I don't care that you're getting paid to have a, quote, marketing job. You're murdering people. You're getting them addicted to something when they're young, and they're going to die because you did it, and you need to own that. And so I think that community action and standards are required. This is not going to be a self-regulating system. We have too much selfishness at hand for us to say, do whatever you want. And so in my country, the reason that we have the Food and Drug Administration is that marketers in the 1910s and 20s came out with, I'll give you a specific example, eyeshadow and mascara that made women go blind. And I don't know about you, but I'm not in favor of that. And as long as it was legal, people did it. And I just read on Slate Star Codex about a drug you can take that helps you lose 2 to 3 pounds a week for as long as you take it. Unfortunately, it will also give you cataracts. And unfortunately, if you take just a little too much, you will explode from the inside and die. So should that be against the law? Well, for the whole time, it wasn't against the law. People made millions of dollars marketing it. I'm not proud to share the same job title as those people. So I think community action and standards have to exist because the system can't take care of itself.
Yeah, it's so valuable because even if we develop an ethical relationship with the people we care about, then of course any kind of powerful focus and problems can emerge in the shadows of that focus, even when we're not deliberately creating them. You know, we benefit the customer, but we also exacerbate climate change. You know, we reward a shareholder, but that increases inequality. We give people content they want, but that plays a part in fracturing society. Actually, that leads me to something I was going to ask, because obviously you're the person who brought the whole idea of tribes into popular culture and into marketing, and it's completely relevant and still at the heart of this is marketing. If that book, though, if your book on tribes didn't exist and somebody walked into a bookshop today and saw something with the name tribes on the cover, they wouldn't necessarily know in advance that what was being referred to was positive. So how can we build inclusivity in a world led by tribes?
Right. So there's so many complexities here. Let's begin by the fact that the term tribes is thousands and thousands and thousands of years old. But in my country, it has been used derisively against First Peoples in a way that's completely inappropriate. The fact that it predates that by millennia is irrelevant if someone has been hurt by this incorrect use of language. But on top of that, we know that the basic building block of human civilization, groups of 150 people wandering through deserts and valleys, the tribal organization of our culture is what makes us human. Mm-hmm. And were there wars between one tribe and another? Of course there were, all the way back to the beginning of 2001, A Space Odyssey. But there was also care and support, and the idea that, for example, if you were in the shtetl in Germany in the 1800s, you could go to a synagogue and there was a little room where if you had money, you put money. If you needed money, you took money. And that level of anonymous, Maimonides-based peer support is really hard to do when you don't live in community with 150 other people. Mm. And so as we've industrialized our society, we've made so many people unseen and anonymous, whereas in a village-based culture, that wouldn't have happened. Or if we think about how social media elevates trolls, you can't be a troll in a community of 150 people. You get kicked out. You're not welcome around the campfire. And so what we've done is created sinecures where anonymous people can throw rocks and distract us from the conversation. So as Steven Pinker has written, we live in a world that is safer and healthier than any world in history. It just doesn't feel that way. And it doesn't feel that way because the media makes a profit panicking us, dividing us, and pushing on real or imagined tribal disconnects. And so what I've written in the book, which people who might criticize it haven't read, but what the book is actually about is finding a group of people who are already aligned and needing a leader and showing up to lead them, to help them get to where they want to go without it being at the expense of others. And I have 40 stories in that book about how people have done that. And what the internet has done since I wrote that book is made it so that those tribes are even easier to find. So I don't have a tribe. You don't have a tribe. You are narrating to this group of 240 people on the call who would be in the world even if you didn't exist. But your job as organizer of them enables you not to manage them, not to tell them what to do, but to help lead them.
Yeah. Now, your books are full of generosity of spirit, and that generosity that you kind of talk about as in within a tribe, the kind of generosity that occurs between people who care about each other and care about the same things. But there was one interview I heard with you where you used generosity in a way that I hadn't quite read in the books. I wondered if we could pick up on it. You said that you were becoming increasingly interested in tracking organizations who had been able to find models that harness the power of generosity, that harness generosity as an engine of growth. And when we think about growth of an organization, that's often the self-directed part of an organization. Even if we're seeking to contribute, the growth is our benefit. So what did you mean by that? And what kind of organizations did you find?
I have no idea. I don't remember saying that, but let me try to expound on generosity for just a minute. Generosity doesn't mean free. Generous doesn't even mean lowering your price. Generous means exerting emotional labor and long-term thinking on behalf of someone else. So if you had an amazing third grade teacher, as I did, John Guillaume was generous to me. He didn't give up his salary at the school. He didn't even share his lunch with me. He was generous in that he went out of his way to see me and help me get to where I wanted to go. And here I am 50 years later remembering that. Generous means elegance in the service of design. Generous means being willing to forego the short-term hustle for the long-term possibility. And I'm not much for tracking companies at all, which is why I don't remember what you said. But I think it's pretty easy to find organizations that have made it from one place to another simply because they said, for this group of people, we are going to commit more energy and effort than seems reasonable to help them achieve something. And we're probably going to charge them for it because if they don't pay for it, they're not going to be enrolled in the journey.
Yeah. You surface some some mindset characteristics in what you've just talked about, and our disposition towards generosity, contributing to a world of abundance, and so on and so forth. And so maybe that takes us on to our individual responsibility as marketers. And turning to the practice, your most recent book, I understand you almost called it Trust Yourself, and specifically with yourself spelled as two words rather than one. So what did you mean by that? And why is that such a foundation of our practice?
I got the hat and everything, and I have the domain. I haven't figured out what to do with it. Okay, so my editor, Nikki Papadopoulos, is really good at what she does, and she persuaded me to change the title, and she was right. I was engaging in wordplay. So if we say, I'm talking to myself, the question is, who is talking and who is listening? Because I think most people who would ordinarily call themselves sane think of themselves as having two. There's two of us, the talker and the listener, the one who is asking to be trusted and the one who is hesitating to trust. So who are the two voices? Well, I think one voice is instinctual and afraid and not that rational. And the other voice is plotting things out and talks in full sentences. When I say trust yourself, what I'm saying is this. that the voice inside of you that has something to say, something to write, something, ability to lead, is being talked out of it by the one who talks in complete sentences. It's Pressfield's resistance. It's, oh, I'd love to do that. Or I have a question, but I didn't post it in the chat, and so they're not going to answer. All of the things that hold us back. And so what I was arguing in the book, in a sort of ham-handed way that no one will read because those 18 pages are gone, was let's just take a deep breath and realize that if you get past your selfish fear of being seen, you actually have something to contribute. That if we stop grasping, if we stop becoming attached to the outcome, and instead do what we would do, even if we knew we would fail, it's quite likely we could do better work. It's quite likely we could be more generous. Mm-hmm. And learning to trust that, I think, is one of the hallmarks of a working creative.
Yeah. I'm still, for my part, pleased that you ended up settling on the title, The Practice. For me, the word practice, it has connotations of repeating something to get better at it, doing something for a living, practicing the law, for example. But also it brings to mind things like, practicing meditation or practicing yoga. It has a spiritual quality of things that you do for intrinsic reward rather than extrinsic reward. Yes. And so it really, putting into practice some of the principles from the book has transformed my work. I'm working on my second book, and putting these ideas into practice, it felt like taking the keys of a much better car, and my foot sort of barely touched the accelerator and boom, you're kind of really taking off. It was kind of almost scary. But when you talk about trusting yourself and contributing to a world of abundance and putting aside the scarcity mindset, easy to do when you've had a good night's sleep, when you've just had 3 pieces of good news, when you have a Seth Godin-shaped track record. How do you flip back into that mindset when you are fearful, when, the last thing you've worked on has just fallen apart, when things are really difficult, which of course, for many people, they are at the moment?
Yeah, it's a great point. And I'll begin by saying, I can't imagine how difficult it is for anyone but me, that everyone is dancing with something. We've lost so many people. We have so many things stacked against us in any situation. I am not minimizing any of that. I will challenge one of the things on your list, however, which is it's even harder to dance with the edge when you're well-known, because it feels like there's more at stake. My friend Elizabeth Gilbert wrote a book called Eat, Pray, Love, which was one of the most successful books of all time. And when she finished the sequel, she brought it to the print shop to make one copy so that she could send it to her editor. And instead, she threw the manuscript in the trash, and no one has ever seen that book. Mm. A year of her life gone. Now, what she learned from that is, 1, don't write a sequel. But 2, you're never going to write Eat, Pray, Love again. You're never going to step in that river twice. And, the people I know who are productive professionals can't do that work if they're simply trying to make another version of their greatest hits. It just doesn't work. That this ability to see, I like to tell the story of a lifeguard, and I write about this particular lifeguard in the practice. Lifeguards don't really have a lot of imposter syndrome when someone is drowning in front of them. They've been trained not to say, oh, is there a better qualified lifeguard around? What happens if I do? They don't do that. They don't say, if I jump in the water and I don't do a perfect job rescuing this person, will I feel badly? They don't do that. They rescue somebody. And that seems really obvious. If someone's drowning in 3 feet of water right in front of you, you rescue them. Yeah, but that book that you're working on, Paul, about marketing well, if you don't write it, someone's going to suffer. And so you're a lifeguard in that moment. And the reason we call it work, and the reason the subtitle is Ship Creative Work, is it's not do what you feel like. It's not do what's authentic. It's not do what comes to you when you're in the right frame of mind. It's not wait for flow. It's none of those things. It's work. You said you were going to do it, so do it. And we know it's work when you do it when you're hungover, when you've had a bad day, when the stakes are really high, when your boss is yelling at you, when the world isn't working right. That's when it's work. And so I love getting a good night's sleep, ever more rare. But I can tell you some of my best work has come in the worst conditions because I know I'm there to do work. I'm not just waiting for the muse to magically tell me the right answer.
Yeah, well, I'll certainly remember that encouragement for a long time. Maybe the 50 years that your teacher's influence lasted with you, although hopefully my next book will be out a bit sooner than that. However great your influence is, most marketers, most of the time, are not yet working consciously with your ideas.
Correct.
Even for Seth. So what if we reverse that so that most marketers most of the time were using your ideas, what impact could that have on the culture of marketing and, more importantly, on the culture of society?
Yeah, I confess I don't care about the culture of marketing. I think the culture of society, human nature is fascinating. One of the things that they teach you in business school, in fact, one of the only 3 things I perhaps learned at all, is the idea of ignoring sunk costs. And people have a lot of trouble understanding what that means. So let me give you an example. Across the street in the little town where I live, they were getting some masonry work done. They had their bricks replaced on their walk. And the guy who was doing it put up one of those inexpensive signs with his name and phone number on it. And he worked on it for 3 days. He did a good job. And as he was packing up, I went over and I said, "You did a good job." He said, "Thanks very much." And I said, "Just a tip, your sign, quality masonry, you spelled the word masonry wrong." And in a lot of towns, you might get away with that, but we're a fairly literate town here. It's probably hurting your business. And he said, "Yeah, I know, but I already paid for the sign." And so he's willingly putting up a sign that is costing him business because he paid for it. Sunk costs are a gift from your former self. If you went to law school for 3 years and now 10 years later you hate being a lawyer, but you still do it because it was so hard to get that law degree, you don't have to accept the gift. The gift is here. Your former self gave it to you. You don't have to accept it. And the reason I talk about this is I don't do any consulting, but if I'm talking to a friend or a colleague, someone who runs a cause that I care about, and we get to talking about marketing, the status quo rears its ugly head. "Oh, we know that would work, but we can't do that because we would have to walk away from this. We can't do that because this thing we did was really hard to do." They're defending sunk costs. And so inside the marketing seminar, which starts today, it's my 11th session. And again, I don't run it. Akimbo's independent of me. But the hardest part of the marketing seminar is persuading people to stop proving to all the other people in the workshop that they were right all along, defending the business they came in with, defending their position, defending all of their previous decisions. They're gifts. You don't have to take them. Acting as if, shifting gears, really hard. So one of the things that's going on in the world of marketing is the game theory of scarcity, of paying off your shareholders, of growth at all costs. But the other thing that's going on is that people who mean well are limiting the possible because they're trying to defend what got them here.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because in a sense you could say that sunk cost, also kind of scales up into what you might call some of the progress traps of capitalism, that have caused, it brought so much good, but are also, economic growth is driving climate change, inequality, and so on. And so maybe we need to reimagine a lot of that. So actually it ties together with a few other thoughts that I had for you. So obviously marketers mostly do our work within organizations. It's what lets us do it. But I've often lamented that there isn't more opportunity for people to essentially market the common good. And one of our members recently has been lamenting that in the case of governments, typically governments pull quite blunt levers. They pull the lever of legal compulsion. They pull the lever of financial incentive. but they do very little to induce voluntary pro-social behavior, either in individuals or in organizations. So as a quick thought experiment, if Joe Biden passed a law tomorrow that made it mandatory to accept job offers from a president, and 5 minutes later, he gave you a call and said, Mr. Godin, I'm creating an unprecedented role in the history of the country. I'm going to create a chief marketing officer for the United States. And you can choose how you want to define the role for all time and what your priorities would be at the moment. So how would you define the role? What priorities would you pursue?
It's a fairly juicy hypothetical, but I'd just go to jail instead. The thing is, there's a long history of the evolution of governance. And I mean, Karl Popper has written about it brilliantly. Plato was completely wrong about it, and all the ways in between. But society and culture are not driven by republics and democracies. They are driven by people like us do things like this. And the question is, what systems can we put in place to amplify the good stuff and diminish the bad stuff? And it's naive to say that that has never happened. It has always happened. So it happens at work where certain people get promoted or winked at or congratulated. It happens in school where certain kids get beat up behind the building, and it happens in countless other places. What we haven't done a good job of since the demise of organized religion as the moderator of these standards is coming up with other ways to reinforce what they are. So if you think about, an intellectual magazine, whether it's Nature or Scientific American or the New Yorker, people like us do things like this. There's a way you're supposed to talk. There's a way you're supposed to use apostrophes. There's a set of topics you talk about and a set of topics that you don't. That is built into the culture, but it's largely unexamined. And I think if we started having straight up democratic votes about it, it wouldn't work. And I think that there's enough downside to organized religion that most people aren't hoping that one human being is going to be in charge of what's allowed and what's not. So let me share a couple stories about this idea of community action and standards. The first one was I went to college in Boston, not at Harvard. And in 1979, throughout campus, there was a sign, hundreds of them on trees, on a Monday morning. And it was very short and very simple. It said, Wednesday is wear blue jeans if you're gay day. That's all it said. And it was magnificent to see what happened because it put everybody into a tizzy. Should I wear jeans? Because I'm not gay. Should I wear jeans? Because I am not gay, right? Like, is this about solidarity? Is it about identification? And for the first time, every single person of the 4,000 people on campus had to think to themselves about what does it even mean to have that label? What does it mean to support people who have or who want or who resist that label? And I loved that it wasn't ad driven. It was just a flyer, but it was mostly community driven. People like us do things like this. The second story, the town in which I live is pretty small. It's only 13 miles from New York City, and it has great public schools. That's one of its highlights. It's also economically diverse, which is why part of the reason it's a great place to live. In the US, there's a Department of Education gives a blue ribbon to schools who meet a certain standard. It's pretty rare. And the elementary school regularly won that. Anyway, the way that the law works is that there's a school budget. And if it doesn't pass, then the district gets one more chance 6 weeks later. And if it doesn't pass the second time, the state takes over and makes draconian cuts in the budget. And in my town, there had been a shift because wealthier people were moving in. So the economic diversity was still here. 20% of the houses had a household income of under 20,000 pounds. And taxes were going up because schools of this quality were expensive to maintain, and a significant portion, particularly elderly, felt left behind. And the school district lost the budget for the first time. And the discussions about this were not going well. They were not going well because it was about, well, you sent your kids to school years ago. Why can't we send our? And it was blameful and divisive. 6 days before the second vote, which wasn't going to work, 3 people in town went to a stationery store and bought 100 feet of blue ribbon. And from the biggest tree in the center of town, which everyone drove past, they hung 100 blue ribbons. And over the next 5 days, without these 3 people doing anything, blue ribbons began to spread. And on the eve of the election, there were thousands of blue ribbons around town. And you've already guessed the budget won 2-1. Mm. And the reason it won is not because they persuaded the people who had voted against it that they were wrong. It's because they activated the people who hadn't voted last time. People like us do things like this. What it means to be in this community. Are you part of this? And so I think while I am in favor of guardrails, while I am in favor of cultural principles, I also know that human beings who say, not on my watch, who say, I'm going to stand up for this, that is ultimately where culture begins. That is ultimately what makes culture change. That was a rant, but there you go.
Oh, it's wonderful. And just picking up on that idea, people like us do things like this. We're close to time to invite Rachael to introduce the local village network. And I just want to get in before we do that. At this point in our conversation, and we'll go to audience questions after we hear from Rachael. So to remind everyone, you can pop your questions in the Q&A rather than the chat. They'll be more discoverable. But Seth, where do you feel we are at this point in the conversation on our headline question of, can all good marketing be marketing for good?
Well, you're playing semantic games a little bit because the word all is the crux of the sentence. And no, there's going to be marketing for some that is bad for others. So I believe NFTs, which I wrote about just the other day, are a toxic trap that are going to cost all of us way too much. But somebody who has got a small community of people that they are trying to market a thing to could please that community, but it's not good for all. And so as long as we have this open society, we're going to have people who are doing marketing that some people think hears them, sees them, helps them, but isn't in the long-term interest of all of us, which is why guardrails and community action are important. But it also, I think it's a little bit of a soft target to say everything we do is always going to be good in the long run for all of us. Because I can't think, what about avocados? I know vegans who don't eat avocados. They don't eat avocados because bees pollinate avocados and bees have been abused by blah, 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 blah. All right, so I'm not allowed to eat avocados now? Like, where does it end? I don't know how to play that game.
Yeah, it's a challenge of how to keep score. 2 might always be better than 1, but this qualitative outcome isn't always necessarily better than that one. And so it's always a question of dancing with dilemma, which of course is the exciting part of applying your ideas, I feel, is always where the dilemmas arrive, when you take those principles. But I think now is more than time to welcome Rachael into the conversation.
Hi, Rachael.
Hello, hi. How you doing?
So maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself, local village network, and how we may be able to help in this month's Coffee with a Cause, which is the last Friday of the month, 11 to 12:30 as usual.
Yeah, brilliant. I just have to say what an honour it is to speak at this platform. So thank you so much for giving us this opportunity. My name's Rachael Box. I'm the CEO and founder of a grassroots charity called Local Village Network. We've developed a very simple yet very effective concept that's designed to help change the lives of vulnerable youth. Now more than ever, young people need hope and inspiration, and we're hoping that you can help us do just that. LVN is a platform that almost everybody can get involved in. Our charitable ask is for just 1 hour of your time. 1 hour might not seem much, but collectively, the evidence shows it can make a transformative difference. We want to make a significant social change in the way in which connections are made. Stats tell us that 3 in every 10 jobs are not advertised, and that 50% of our poorest young people are in 20% of our schools. Networks are crucial to finding positive pathways. The young people that we work with are stuck and need your help. To give you a bit of background, I started LVN back in 2015 when I engaged with a group of local young boys who felt that they had little choice for their future. They had ideas, but they were unsure of how to get started. And we created a program called Be Your Own Boss, and it's based on the concept that lots of adults got together in a village mentality to give time to help with their business ideas. This grew, and before long, we had lots of adults donating time and lots of young people requesting the power of the hour support for their individual needs. Using the evidence gathered from our case studies and pilots in various settings, from gang intervention programs, people referral units, from scratch on estates and with the local college, I partnered with Professor of Criminology, Dr. Robert Heskay from John Moores University in Liverpool, to co-author an academic paper called Countering Network Poverty is a Precursor to Gang Activity, wherein we outline the importance of social mixing. During the journey, we've worked with behaviour scientists in Rory O'Sutherland's team at Ogilvy Change to put together a report that outlines the psychology explaining the importance of networks and the perceived barriers that hold people back. The demand and the support for LVN has been great. Lots of people want to get involved, but it turned into a little bit of a logistical nightmare. To combat this, we turned to technology as a solution to help us manage the demand. We've now developed an app that safely manages and matches the volunteers with the young people. Crucial to our delivery is signposting. Once we've inspired a young person, we also needed to know where to send them for deeper engagement and employment opportunities. So we built into the app a signposting function. We're also fortunate enough to have this personal support of one of the most senior female directors at Google who helps us oversee the coding. So we now have in place the technology, the methodology, and the training to upscale our model, and this is where we need your help. The pandemic has meant that even more youth need support in re-engaging and finding direction. By coming together as responsible adults, we can help refocus them and prepare them for their future. As a charity, we have 2 key offerings: our signposting app, that's recently been adopted by Scotland Yard and the Metropolitan Police as part of their positive youth engagement strategy, and our Power of Now delivery, where we've just secured a grant for the DWP to pilot in 4 North London job centres starting this month, all delivering online, making it even easier to give time. So as you can hear, we've lots to shout about, but we're a tiny charity and we do not have the marketing resource. So we need your help to get the message out there, to help us target youth, help us target the youth that need our help and tell them about the opportunities on the app, and help us to reach out to businesses that care to help motivate a culture of giving back. We want to make giving and receiving an hour to benefit youth common practice, a sharing economy that benefits us all. So if you're interested in getting involved, please reach out and help us create that magic formula that will attract those that see the value in our movement and to help us make more impact.
Wonderful.
So if you're interested, please I'll put my contact details in the chat. Thank you.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you. And Seth, one of the reasons we chose Rachael and Local Village Network for this exchange is because we thought that their approach of taking a village mindset to creating a positive influence on young people, including from disadvantaged areas, really fit with your thoughts on culture change. And also because we had an idea that there might be quite a few guests with us this evening, with you joining us, Seth. And although the Coffee with a Cause gathering is for MarketingKind members, anybody with us today can contribute an hour of your time to mentoring a young person through Local Village Network through the Power of an Hour program. So you can contact Rachel through her contact details in the chat, or you can drop me a line at paul@marketingkind.org and I will connect you as well. Another thing I wanted to do is people will want more Seth than is available in one session. So I wanted to point out that I subscribe to Seth's blog, and it is a moment of professional uplift every day, and is one of the few things that I read as soon as I see it. I also listen to the Akimbo podcast, and this is a real opportunity to hear Seth dive deeply into very specific topics. So if you read the books and you're thinking, but what about this particular issue, the podcast is the way to go. People can find out about the courses at akimbo.com, and one of the people in the audience this evening has done the Out MBA and says it is the best thing that she ever did. So if you want more of Seth, there is a lot of Seth available. Your content creation skills are pretty Pantogrelian. I mean, it's huge. Turning to some of the questions, and we've got some that were sent in ahead of time and some that are in the Q&A. I'm going to answer Jeremy's because I can send you, Seth has actually put his book recommendations at the end of his own books. So I will send an image to you, Jeremy, with some of Seth's book recommendations, unless we need to come back to that question. The second one maybe is controversial for us, and it's sent in anonymously in the Q&A box. Seth, to what degree do you see the MarketingKind mission, using marketing to change the world for the better, as fundamentally impossible due to the medium itself and how it centers on perpetuating people's own insecurity or the promise of a better future through purchases? So is marketing negatively contributing to people's mental health, and should we give up at MarketingKind?
To misquote Marshall McLuhan, I'm not sure you know anything of my work. The marketing that you are describing is called advertising. And advertising definitely thrived as a mass market tool by threatening to leave people behind, by identifying them as outsiders, by lowering their status if they didn't have a nicer car, that you have bad breath and you're ugly too. But if you give us some money, we'll fix your problem. That's advertising. And I have never been particularly good or a fan of advertising. I think it's a miracle because advertising completely changed the world. Some people would argue that advertising ended the Cold War. But that's not what we're here to talk about. Marketing is something more elemental than that. Marketing is why you go to one restaurant instead of another, and in some ways why you married somebody instead of another. Because we never know the truth of anything. What we know is the story that we receive. And we can send a story or we can not. But there's going to be a story sent either way. And marketing is the art of telling a story that you are proud to make true on behalf of someone who's going to engage with you. And I don't believe that marketing by its nature, because it's not a medium, it is an approach, by its nature hurts society. I can think of lots of examples where it helps, because if humans are living in community, then marketing is present.
Yeah, it maybe links to one of our pre-submitted questions, in this case from Ed Mayo, who asks, what would you put into a Hippocratic oath for marketers, and do we need one?
You know, the Hippocratic oath for doctors is really interesting, because if you've ever been to the barber, you know that what doctors used to do is let blood out of your body. And that's how George Washington died. He was ill and they took half the blood out of his body trying to make him better. So the Hippocratic oath didn't really work in those days, number one. And number two is it's based on an enforced scarcity, which is you need a license to be a doctor. Mm-hmm. And we don't license people to be marketers because we're all marketers. And so I don't know how to get people to take the oath, but with all of that squirreling around left behind, I guess I would say, do work you're proud of. Do it in front of your mom. That would be enough for me.
Yeah. I'm going to turn back to the Q&A, and Giles poses an interesting question. He says, why has climate change not managed a banger of a campaign that worked, like Make Poverty History?
Okay, so first I'm going to say, I don't think that a campaign is marketing. I think it's advertising. I don't think poverty is history, but I can describe why we have made such strides in poverty in the last 10 years, that there are still 1 billion people who are unspeakably poor on this planet, which is insane and shameful. However, the poorest are less poor than they used to be, and there are fewer of them than there used to be. And part of it is the ratchet that small c capitalism has been able to introduce, that when someone gets a solar panel, they are more likely to read at night. And if they read at night, they're more likely to gain a skill, which makes it more likely that they can get a battery, which makes it more likely that they get a sewing machine, which makes it more likely, et cetera. That doesn't mean it's the most direct path. It doesn't mean that it's fair or evenly distributed. But what we're seeing is that there is a ratchet in place to move something forward. Now, I wrote about global warming on my blog more than 10 years ago for the first time. And I said, it's a really dumb thing to call it. Global is a good thing and warming is a good thing. And we should be calling it atmosphere cancer, because atmosphere is a scientific term and cancer is a chronic degenerative disease. And if you don't pay attention to it, you're going to die. And there are very few cancer deniers in the world for a good reason. So what happened with climate change is, number one, it is a slow process that's hard to take good photos of. That's not true for poverty. Number two is it is related to each of us ultimately seeing our demise. That's a hard thing to sell. It's hard to sell life insurance and funeral services. It's hard to say to people, we're all going to die. And number three is it's complicated and it involves statistics. And as we've seen with the vaccine nonsense of people making up stories that aren't true, when something is complicated and involves statistics, people freak out because human beings are bad at that. And now we've got a commercial industry, the oil business, that had an incentive to put misinformation into the world, bad marketing, knowing that they were doing it, to cloud the waters for 20 years, which they did. So the opportunity is to figure out how to tell the right story to the right people, the smallest viable audience, to put a ratchet in place so that that ratchet persists in a race to solve the problem. And for me, that feels like carbon allocation. It feels like creating an economic incentive for technologists and institutions to compete against each other to either use less carbon or to sequester carbon. If we had that regime in place, then the race would be on. And it would be a race in the correct direction. What we know is that recycling plastic bottles is a myth. It was invented by the plastic industry. It doesn't work. Making people feel bad for drinking bottled water isn't going to solve our atmosphere cancer problem. What might solve it is the fact that there's a new electric motor that's about to come out that uses 1/3 as much electricity as any other electric motor, and it can be retrofitted up and down the supply chain. What might change it is that solar panels are now cheaper than coal. These things that humans are good at, moving in the right direction. So I think the mistake was not identifying the 10,000 humans, that's all we needed, who could put in place a worldwide carbon regime, because if we had had that in place, we'd be way ahead of the game. Another rant.
It was wonderful. And I think we're all going to be thinking about atmosphere cancer and the concept of that for a long time to come. And just reminding us of the power of a small group of people is very heartening at MarketingKind, because, you know, we're a minimum viable market and we want to make a really positive contribution to the world. There's actually one of our pre-submitted questions that is a bit cheeky and gets straight to the heart of what we've just been talking about. So James asks, who can we learn more about marketing from? The CMO of Procter & Gamble or Greta Thunberg?
Oh, there's no question. There's no question. You know the answer to that. Without hesitation. Procter & Gamble figured something out with Ivory soap. And they figured out a whole bunch of things. Ivory soap and Crisco. It turns out once you make a whole bunch of ivory soap, the leftovers are Crisco, or the other way around. I can't remember. But they had to sell a bunch. So they figured out where to start advertising it for a penny less than it cost them to make it. And they repeated that process for 100 years. $2, $3, $4 billion. We call them soap operas for a reason, because Procter & Gamble owned the soap operas. And if this was 1965, the answer would be, well, Greta's not born yet, but it would also be P&G, because they know how to do advertising. But for a 15 or 16-year-old young woman to change the way millions of people thought about something, 100 points to Greta.
There's a question from John. I've just lost it on my screen, but I'll paraphrase. So, not every marketer is a CMO. CMOs are not CEOs. Even directors of social change organizations have pressure from their trustees and funders and so on. And what John was asking is, what is the responsibility for young people? So should you avoid certain industries on ethical grounds, or is it viable to go into those industries because they're hotbeds of marketing and then try to use your skills for good? And I'll quickly see if there's anything. I've just found his question. So he's saying that he knows a lot of people who learned their craft in industries such as gambling, for example, and then ultimately moved on to brands that had a more positive effect in the world. So what's the limit of individual responsibility when we are part of a much bigger marketing process?
Yeah, this not the question I thought you were asking, but it's a really good question. So Peter Singer, the brilliant ethicist, has argued that you should keep working at Goldman Sachs and send your salary to stop river blindness. That is way better than joining the Peace Corps or going abroad as a missionary, because they're overpaying you relatively at Goldman. Go live in a tent, send $90,000, you'll save a lot of lives. So I went to business school, and most of the people I went to business school with justified an extraordinary shift in their perspective and went to work for McKinsey. That if you look at the graduating class of Yale University in the last few years, I think the numbers are 4% of the people show up saying they would never work for an investment bank, and 80% end up doing so, some number like that. It's easy to get swayed into the system. And if you can figure out how to learn while you're there and then leave, I'm not going to argue with you, but most of my colleagues don't leave because sunk costs, because we get stuck on a lifestyle, because status roles, because who we affiliate with. It's really rare that someone like Scott Harrison goes from being a party promoter to being someone who raises money for charity water. Those are rare. If you've got the guts and the wherewithal to do that, I'm not going to argue with you. But here's what I really think. The best way to learn marketing is not to work for a big company. The best way to learn marketing is to do marketing. And you can do marketing in lots and lots and lots of ways, because you don't need a budget anymore, because marketing is not advertising. So what you could do right this minute in your spare time is go raise $10 million for Rachel's organization. You don't have to ask Rachel's permission. Just go figure out how to do it. Figure out what the story is and the direct mail is and the social media presence is, or whatever it is. Go raise the $10 million and give it to her. You will learn more doing that than you will working for a casino and then deciding to go work for Rachel.
And when you do figure out how to do that, once again, you can contact Rachel at Local Village Network. Her details are in the chat. I would also be happy to make that introduction. There's a couple of questions, one in the Q&A and one pre-submitted, that are very similar, so I'll put those to you. Will in the Q&A asks about the value of brands and purpose statements and company values as a tool for good. And Ben, in the pre-submitted questions, asks, how can marketing play a part in its organization's infinite purpose rather than fall into meeting senior management numbers?
Okay, brands are not logos. And very often the people on this call say we're doing a brand redesign when they mean a logo redesign. A brand, if you've got any presence with anybody at all, has nothing to do with your logo or your mission statement. It is the perception of the person you're dealing with before the next interaction happens about what they expect will happen. So Hyatt has a logo, but they do not have a brand. because if Hyatt came out with a line of sneakers, we have no clue what it would be like. But Nike has a brand, because if Nike said, we're announcing a hotel, instantly we could guess what the experience would be like. It's the expectation, the promise, the thing that saves us time. And so most mission statements that I have read could be swapped from one company to another, and you wouldn't be able to tell. They're like logos. They don't mean anything. A mission statement that means something is when Patagonia says, we're actually going to reduce the number of items we sell. Or they say, we're going to stop selling this profitable item because it leaves too much of an environmental footprint. That's not a mission statement, that's mission action. And if you do enough mission action, the statement gets made by itself. And so I want to understand, which clients are you refusing to take? Which products are you refusing to sell? Which employees do you refuse to keep on the payroll? What are you actually doing when you show up in the world to do this thing you say is your job? Because that is how you build a brand, not by issuing a statement.
I'm going to go to the question from Teresa, because I can understand how, from the perspective of a lot of the causes we support, so we support a lot of small charities and social enterprises through our voluntary activity in the volunteering platform. And a lot of them are doing worthwhile work, but are pretty small and anonymous as organizations. And so in a sense, they've got the substance, but they don't have the sizzle, or they haven't thought about the contribution that they're making through the lens of marketing. So, what advice would you give a really small cause that is a perfect candidate for your approach because they don't have an advertising budget? But what can they do to become, maybe you might think of as more remarkable?
Okay, so what does it mean for something to be remarkable? It doesn't mean you have a gimmick, and it definitely doesn't mean you have sizzle. Sizzle doesn't work for me. What it means to be remarkable is that someone will benefit by talking about you. Consider the difference between a hairdresser and a massage therapist before the pandemic. If you get a haircut, your pals will say, nice haircut, because there's a social expectation that they will. If you get a massage, no one says, hey, Paul, you look really relaxed. Did you get a massage? Hairdressing is remarkable. Massage is not. There's not an absolute statement about their value for the money. It's just, was it worth talking about? Twitter grows, Clubhouse grows, Facebook grows, because each individual benefits by telling their friends to go use it. So how did Charity Water raise $250 million? How did Room to Read raise $250 million? Not by doing work that's worthwhile, though they both do. They did it because the donors benefit from telling their friends. It's built in. So what I would say to the small micro-charities is, there's no doubt that your work is worthwhile. We're not discussing that. We're not even discussing whether or not you deserve to be bigger. What we're saying is, are you willing to invest the cycles and, quote, pay the price to become the sort of organization that does get bigger? Because it's not based on whether it's worthwhile. It's based on, did you figure out the mechanics of it? So my dad was the volunteer head of the United Way when I was growing up in Buffalo, New York. The United Way was brilliantly constructed to work in a industrial payroll-based economy, because what they did was they would make a sale to one person in the organization, the CEO, for payroll deduction. And then they would be able to say to all the employees, click this little box, and every week $1 will come out of your paycheck, tax deductible. And then we as a group will be able to support all these charities in our community. And they had the thermometer and you could see it going up, and millions and millions and millions of dollars raised. Was that because the causes they supported were the very best causes in the world? I don't know. It was because the mechanics of being remarkable, of status and affiliation and the stories we tell ourselves, those were right. So here's what you're not allowed to do. You're not allowed to say, I worked really hard for this cause. This cause is worthwhile. Therefore, we deserve your time and money, because people are too selfish to hear that.
Yeah. I I'm going to go to Liz's question because it picks on something that I had considered asking you earlier myself, and maybe gives an interesting angle on it. So one of the things I'd been thinking about when thinking about you, Seth, I was thinking back to one of your previous books, All Marketers Tell Stories. And of course, we tell stories because individual people, we tell ourselves stories, we tell each other stories, and that is what guides our decisions, our choices, our behaviors. Now, one of the challenges is, in recent years, since the financial collapse and exacerbated by COVID and, what will likely come after COVID, is that so many of the big stories that we believe in have crumbled away. Stories of progress, stories that tomorrow is better than yesterday. We have lost so much that we don't have the stories that provide the scaffolding. We know how to climb out of our difficulties. And so I had thought earlier to ask you what kind of stories we as marketers should be seeding as that kind of scaffolding to help people rekindle hope as we come out of the pandemic. And Lizzie's question kind of also asks whether a story of connectedness is relevant there, because we've all been hit by COVID, albeit in very different ways. So what stories can we seed to offer hope? And is connectedness the route to achieving that?
My friend Ben Zander tells the story, certainly apocryphal, that you've heard before. Two shoe salesmen are sent somewhere far away. And one shoe salesman writes back, "This is hopeless. No one here wears shoes." And the other shoe salesman telegraphs back, "Great news. No one here has shoes." And we have to decide personally and then as a community where we're going. I know that in the United States, the 10 years after the Spanish flu were roaring. And I know that in the UK, the 10 years after World War II were something to behold. And we are now looking at a world that is making new rules, new connections, and new decisions. And also, for the first time in my lifetime, it's not going to be about the baby boomers, because I'm the youngest baby boomer, and the people older than me, they don't get to be in charge anymore. And so that is a 50-year run. We got to decide the music. We got to decide the food. We got to decide the art. We got to decide all of it. And now somebody else. And that means change is happening. And what marketers do is we make change. So this is what you sign up for. This is not 1952. This is a decade of change. And we're going to have to figure out the narratives that we want to bring connection to people and possibility to people, to weave together things to make things better, not just to make a profit. Because we can't shrink ourselves to greatness, but we also can't create what we could create simply by investing in Bitcoin. It's not going to work.
Yeah. Carolina sent in a pre-submitted question, which is a very practical, practice-related counterpart to that question. And she asks, in simple terms, if you were to give one action for any business to do every week to make the world a better place, what would it be?
Well, I'm not sure there's such a thing as a business. I think there's people who are momentarily aligned in community action. And we could call that a corporation, but what are the people going to do? And what I have seen is that culture defeats strategy every time. It eats it for lunch. Culture in the organization where we live, culture is the dominant force. So who is enrolled? Who is signed up? Who are the heroes? Who are we rewarding? What are things like around here? People like us do things like this. Back when the internet was young, there were people frequently bragging about how they were cheating the system, violating this law or that law, trading sales back and forth and watching the stock price go up. And if that becomes the culture, that's what you get more of. And if we look at the Soviet Union 20 years ago, their culture is different than it is now, which is different than the culture in Wales. What culture do you have in your organization? Who gets rewarded? Who gets fired? Do you get fired for making a mistake, or do you get fired for being selfish? Do you get fired for taking authority, or do you get fired for taking responsibility? What we could do every week is get really clear with each other about what journey we're enrolled on and what's it like around here. Because the answer to the question, what's it like around here, is also the answer to the question of where is this place going?
Mitra asks, maybe picking up on my introduction, you've done so many things other people can only wish that they'd done, but what are the most significant things that you wish you had done or still seek to accomplish?
The things I'm most proud of are things that the public probably has never seen. And, the microphone that I use is available to everybody. That's never been true before. And while a lot of people read my blog every day, no one reads my tweets because I don't have any. And there are lots of places where I'm not showing up. So the door is open for other people to do this. It's not a scarcity thing. It's an abundance thing. We don't have a problem of people can't get the microphone. We have a problem of people aren't overcoming their resistance enough to take the microphone. And that is our future, to get to a place where 1,000 people, just 1,000, say, it's better around here because of the culture you helped create. And if there's 173 people on this call and each one of us gets 1,000 of our peers to think differently about a critical issue, and you do that one more time, now you're at 173 million. Then you're done. That's enough.
Yeah. Would you, if you started again without your reputation, track record, resources, how would you start differently to what you're doing now, or would you replicate it? Or?
Well, I think it's pretty clear I did start without any of those things. The difference now from 1984 is the microphone that I was talking about. I think that earning attention and trust from a small group of people, combined with organizing the way Paul and Anna are organizing like-minded people in a tribe of possibility, those are the two elements. Do not get distracted by likes or friends or followers, because those people don't like you, they're not your friends, and they're not following you. Instead, focus on, would they miss you if you were gone? Because if we can build community where you would be missed where you were gone, then you're probably doing something of value.
Ben actually sent in a question ahead of time asking if you could remove social media from existence, would you, and why? And I guess he must have tracked the fact that you're quite sparse in the use of social media and you prefer to build your own permission assets.
Yeah, so we've always had social media. We've had social media as long as there have been people gossiping on the back fence. I think my friend Cory Doctorow's point of adversarial interoperability is critical here. That we don't have to wave a magic wand. All we need to do is make it so that there aren't dominant monopolistic players. That if there's lots and lots of places that can engage with lots and lots of places, then the signal to noise ratio will change and we will inevitably ratchet in a better direction because it shouldn't be monolithic. And anonymous hate speech has always been a problem, but now it's multiplied. And when you do it for money, it's even worse. And so we're not going to get rid of, quote, social media, but I do believe that people are looking for optimism and they're looking for a day well spent. And too often, a day spent being the victim and the product of social media is simply exhausting and creates no value.
Yeah. I better turn to Alexandra's question because I see it's got a lot of upvotes, and it may be because we have plenty of people who specialize in insight in the MarketingKind community. And so this question asks, as a consumer researcher, I often find a blurred line between consumer privacy and accessing data so that we can better understand people. How do we see consumer research playing out in the future, and what can we do as consumer researchers to make sure we gain insight without marginalizing consumers and their data?
Yeah, great question. And I'm not a professional at this, so take all this with a grain of salt. But there is a huge difference between a census and a survey, between understanding what every single person is doing and thinking, and understanding deep in your bones what a kind of person is thinking and doing. There are no privacy concerns when it comes to surveys. To get intimate with how individuals believe, just ask them, and they'll tell you if you're good at it. When we start doing census work, where we're looking at everyone's data trail, it's a different game. And there, number one, I don't think you get the same insights. I think that data mining has been over hyped in that sense, because it's not, data mining isn't really about insights. It's more about stealing attention. But the best marketers I have ever known are intuitive marketers. They know in their bones what good taste is. They know what their customers want before their customers know. And, you know, I interviewed Diane von Furstenberg a few years ago, and she was unable to adequately describe how she knew what fashion would work. But she knew, because she was an intuitive marketer. Well, part of that is she hung out a lot with people who cared about fashion. And industrial capitalism tries to let itself off the hook by saying, well, here's the report. It's all the proof. And that's not how you make Hamilton, right? Lin-Manuel Miranda did not commission a census study to figure out that Hamilton would be a play that would change people around the world. He did it because he understood a bunch of genres. He knew the change he wanted to make. He was able to say, I made this, I'm putting myself on the hook here. And then he put it in front of 50 people and watch what happened. And then he put it in front of 100 people. And then you have Hamilton. And I think we need more Hamilton and less census-based study work.
Is there anything that we should do at MarketingKind to better bring fruition to the aspirations that you have for how marketing can change culture for the better?
One of the most popular blog posts I ever did is also the shortest one. And it says, you don't need more time. You just need to decide. And you have done this extraordinary work of organizing folks who are thinking and talking and leaning into this. It's enough. Now decide. Go do it.
Awesome. Well, Seth, you have put so much light in the sky in this conversation. I think whole new journeys will be visible to us, possible to us. We've got a lot of work to do to follow up on all of this advice and to take advantage of it. I know that just preparing for this conversation changed me as a marketer, a change maker, maybe even as a person, to be frank. And the kinds of advice that I've been giving, it would be interesting to see if any of our members can spot, where I've had advice for our causes on a month-by-month basis in the Coffee with a Cause, for example, that is distinctively Seth flavored in terms of the source of its inspiration. Is there anything, I better put a couple of information points as we're nearing the end very quickly. Coffee with a Cause with Local Village Network is March 26th at 11 a.m. for any members who wish to join. And the Power of an Hour program, anyone can contribute an hour of their time. Drop me a line, paul@marketingkind.org, or contact Rachel directly through her details in the chat. We'll also write to you to make sure that you have those. Our next exchange on tackling modern day slavery is on April 14th at 5 p.m. Seth, do you have a final thought for us? I'm all
out of words. I'm so grateful for everybody here. Thank you for taking the time and for the work you do. You
are going to be so missed. Thank you so much for joining us. I think everyone is giving you a standing ovation. And I think that I've just about achieved my promise of making sure that we land on time.
Go make a ruckus, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.